Hi, Marge and friends. This is Amy Kooster. I am calling in today to talk about advocacy. So I think a lot of times when folks talk about advocacy in the library world, they're talking about advocating to their stakeholders. So for public libraries, that's going to be taxpayers, that's going to be legislators who have decision-making power over, what kind of funds the library may get, what they need to do with those funds. And there are all sorts of resources available to that effect on things like Library Legislation Day. I would highly recommend that you find out in your community who's already involved in Library Legislative Day. A lot of times state libraries will have organized efforts for the once a year when they go and demonstrate at the state level and also at the federal level what the library adds to the community and what it really takes to continue to offer those sorts of services. I'd also highly recommend looking into the ALSC, Association for Library Service to Children Everyday Advocacy Initiative. It is spearheaded by the intrepid Chicago public librarian Jenna Nemec-Louisi, and she maintains a newsletter. She does weekly email blasts with one quick little tidbit about how you can work at being a better advocate to your larger and also smaller local stakeholders, how to mine information that you can craft into a story to tell to your stakeholders. So great tips for advocacy there. But since a lot of people talk about those types of advocacy, I want to focus instead the majority of my little talk, which hopefully won't go super long, to three different types of advocating. And the first one is to advocate within your own library. So you're advocating for youth services and its value. I think a lot of people who end up in public libraries didn't necessarily always know that's where they were going to end up, and they certainly didn't think that they would ever be working with children. A lot of professionals come out of library programs or training without ever having had a class or a training having to do with youth services, working with children. And even if they're peripherally aware of what goes on in the children's room and the children's department, that doesn't mean necessarily that they get it. There's still a lot of misconception that, what we do in youth services is just reading to kids, and that's not it by any stretch of the imagination. And I think if you ever, some alternate universe or something could have an adult services person come in and try and do a story with a bunch of antsy little 2 and 3-year-olds, they would definitely be singing a different tune afterwards. So a lot of times it's really important for us as active youth services practitioners to make sure that we're sharing our messages about what's going on in the children's room, what sort of training we're doing as professionals, what sort of things we're encountering day to day. We need to convey those to adult services staff, to technical services staff, and especially to the administration. Even administrators who began in the children's room don't necessarily remember what the day-to-day realities of it are. The hundreds and hundreds of really powerful, meaningful, potentially life-changing conversations that we're having with kids and their families on a day-to-day basis. It can be easy to overlook the fact that a reader's advisory interaction for a 6th or 7th grader isn't just necessarily finding some leisure reading. It can be something to help them figure out how to navigate through something that's really challenging them in their life, whether it's sexual orientation, bullying, issues at school, issues at home. These are life-changing services and life-affirming services that we're providing. And also I think a lot of adult staff and administrators, they get how important the early literacy value of the youth services department is, but they don't necessarily understand it or see it in action. And for that reason, I think it's really vital that we capture some sort of outcomes, some of these stories from the families who are coming to our programs, and what they are doing to change their behavior at home to help their kids become the best readers and most successful children they can. So in terms of advocating within your own library to your administration, I think it really comes down to figuring it out what you're doing, ways you can capture that, and ways you can meaningfully convey it to the folks in your library who don't have day-to-day firsthand experience in the youth room. Only once they start to understand how vital the skills and tasks you're doing in the youth room, only once they understand those things are they going to be able to recognize, oh yes, they do need this portion of the budget, or they do need this much time to plan. They do need these resources so that we can continue to provide such a high value service to families in the community. A great place to start is looking at your circulation statistics. I think oftentimes it kind of flabbergasts a lot of adult folks, adult services people, when they recognize that in most libraries, youth services is counts for about half of the circulation. Some places more, some places less, but it's usually a lot more than they would pinpoint on their own if you just kind of ask them, how much do you think youth accounts for? So that's a great place to start advocating, is within your own library. I also want to emphasize the importance of advocating for your kids. And I think the work we do in libraries is very powerful, but it's also often limited to the library space, and it doesn't have to be that way. So when we see kids in our programs who we recognize might be struggling with something, without breaching any sort of, customer-child confidentiality, which isn't like an actual legal thing as far as I'm aware, but without kind of causing problems in that relationship, I think it's really imperative that we as professionals recognize the things that kids in our communities are going through, and then reach out to other community partners to try and figure out how we can address those. So if you see an influx of kids coming into your library after school who are like famished, that's something to talk to schools about. How can we as the library work together with the school or other community organizations to address that issue? I think when it comes to advocating for our kids, it's important to recognize that we're not the only institution in the community who our major goal is to support kids and to help them become productive readers and learners. And once we recognize we're not the only ones doing that, then we can get to a place where we don't have to work alone, and we don't have to advocate for kids alone. So take what you see in your programs, in your spaces, in your readers advisory interviews, and just in your conversations with kids, and think about how you can take the knowledge that you glean from those interactions and apply those, help share those messages outward to other community organizations that maybe if kids you recognize that they're struggling with bullying in after school programs, you see that in the library, you hear them talking about it. We can't necessarily fix what happens in those after school programs, but we can definitely make connections so that we're advocating for our kids to have the best possible experiences they can. And last but not least, I want to encourage you to advocate for yourselves, both as professionals and as human beings who have limits to what you can do in a 24-hour period, a 5-day work week, if that's what you work. So first of all, advocate for yourself as a professional. Take professional development seriously if that's something that you're into. And that can be attending conferences, it can be attending webinars, it can be reading blogs, it can be having conversations with your coworkers at your library or at other libraries. Any of those things is valid, and there's no reason that one of them is necessarily more impactful than the other. So advocate for yourself to attend those things, give yourself time and space to do that, but also empower yourself to ask your supervisor to recognize the value of those things that you're doing to make yourself a better professional. That's not to say that they're necessarily going to pay for you to go all over the place to conferences, that sort of thing, but I think we as youth services practitioners, we tend to get to a place where we're in a routine, we're offering programs, we feel like we're getting a lot of praise and recognition from the families we're serving, and we consider that as enough. We feel like we don't necessarily need more recognition than that. And I think that can be a bit of a hindrance for us in our careers. I think we need to feel empowered that the work that we do is very important. It's in fact vital in the lives of kids and their families. And we need to seek some recognition about that at an administrative or supervisory level. So do the professional development, be involved, and ask your supervisor to recognize that. Not only because then you're getting credit for all of this work that you're doing, but you can start to recognize your own expertise as a youth services practitioner, and also get your supervisor to be able to recognize you as an expert as well. Because, I will say this very, very bluntly, the work you do is expert. Not everyone can do it, so be empowered by it. And the last little tidbit with advocating for yourself is recognize that there's only so much that a human being can actually do in any given time period. On the one side of the coin, I just encourage you to be involved and have conversations and do trainings and professional development. But on the other side, you also need to make sure you're taking times to rejuvenate, to think, to reflect, to just read what you want to read, to talk about something besides libraries, heck, to veg out on the couch and binge watch Battlestar Galactica. This has all happened before. It'll all happen again. So you need to make sure you take breaks. And that's the way to really, I think, be a long-term, powerful advocate for youth, advocate for libraries. And you can only do that by advocating for yourself and keeping yourself well and healthy. That's what I have to say on advocacy. I hope that this week's course material is interesting. You guys have some great discussions. Thanks, Marge, for inviting me to speak with your class, and I hope you all have a great one. Bye.